students of Reddit, what was the reason for why one of your teachers had a breakdown during class? My math professor in college was going through a divorce and they were fighting for custody of their 2 younger children. You can tell he was irritated because he wore his emotions on his sleeve. One day he came into class about 5 minutes late and he was physically shaking. He was violently crying and apologized to us and said the class was cancelled. He apparently lost the custody fight with his ex-wife. Physics teacher came into class late, walked past the podium, and walked into the chalkboard. Like, he would have kept walking if it wasn't there. He then picked up one of those plastic pen things that you put chalk in. Proceeded to try and write on the chalkboard, even though the pen was empty of chalk, all the while mumbling incoherently. Found out later he had a stroke and managed to drive himself to the university. My 8th grade Spanish teacher and the freshman baseball coach were having an affair. It eventually became public knowledge and she had several breakdowns as her divorce played out over course of my 8th grade year. I had the pleasure of joining the freshman baseball team the next year and experiencing his own share of breakdowns from his own divorce. Some guy came in late and started talking to his friends. The teacher chimed in with something like, "If you're gonna be late, you might as well not show up at all." So he said fine, B, and left. She stared blankly at the door for a good 30 seconds and then yelled at everyone else in the class for what one, now absent, student did. I distinctly remember her claiming at one point that everyone in this room is failing this class. My university physics professor got the call that his dog had died right before a test. Needless to say, we didn't have a test that day. Oh. When a dog dies, I always get sad. Regardless whose dog it is. Class cried with him. She was a substitute teacher at elementary school, and at some point a kid took it too far and threw a bottle at her. It was an empty plastic bottle, but still. Poor teacher. Sometimes it's not the physical things that hurt you, and sometimes it's a plastic bottle to the face. I can provide a more positive breakdown from years ago. English teacher realized 5 minutes into the discussion of a book that only a few people had done the assigned reading, and he put his book on a table and went on a tear about how you can't just go through life assuming that other people will pick up your slack and that it's important to value your education and not just bull poop your way through classes. I could tell he was disappointed in the class and several students were embarrassed for not putting in a little bit of effort to read a ducking book. The one that sticks out is my history teacher, who was a level 10 incompetent at anything. She usually blabbered on through class about stupid things. She was always very well put together, dressed well, hair done, it's just there was no substance to her teaching or conversational topics. One day, she started talking about a coworker she was very close to when she was young. Mind you, she had to be approaching her 60s. The story started out innocent enough where we were all basically ignoring her, and pretty soon it veered off into this terrible reality. Her coworker had gone home from work and died in a car accident on the way home. This had to have been 30 years ago. She was crying, saying how much she missed her and how crazy life can be. The way she explained the story was so sad too. They had made plans the following day and my teacher was excitedly waiting for that coworker to come in. I disliked that teacher immensely, but I felt so sorry for her. She stood there, crying because her friend was gone. I don't think at 15 I could imagine that sort of loneliness or pain. But now, a good 15 years later, I've had her experiences and I sympathize with her. The 9th of November 2003. We were in first period and we had a moment of silence in remembrance at the time that the first plane hit the tower. I think it was a Channel 1 thing. The teacher broke down. She was panting, pulling her hair, and began mumbling to herself. The mumbling became louder and she started to pace. Finally she walked over to a coffee pot that was in the room and picked up a large Ziploc bag of ground coffee while screaming, "I wish this was Coke. I need it right now." She then fell against the wall and slid down. We let her go for a minimum or two before a few of my friends and I went over and helped her up and walked her to the front office. We got the best long-term sub ever after that, a true influence I'd only seen a few times in all of my schooling. Edit, I was a senior in high school. Although on the East Coast, we were not close to New York, and to my knowledge the teacher had no connections with anyone from New York. We made our English teacher cry. but we didn't want to because we really liked her. She was about to switch to another school and she had some really important things to do. She needed to call someone, so she gave us a task to do and left the room for like 5 minutes. We were a horrible class, around 16/17 at this time, at mainly boys. We had breakfast together that day and stuff was still in the classroom. So the boys decided it was time to throw it around and hit the window with sticker butter, while one boy tried to clean the window using a squeegee. Is that the right word? Never used it before, and I'm not native. Someone else decided to throw out the trash. Another teacher came because she saw the trash flying by the window of her classroom, and in the moment she stared yelling at us, the other teacher came back. She immediately started crying as she saw what was going on. I think she was angry and overwhelmed because she liked the school and didn't want to leave, but in this moment we were the little a-holes making the decision easier. But the next week, she came into the class and had written a small poem for us about being too old to throw around trash and playing with butter. My teacher spent 15 minutes trying to figure out how to turn the volume up for a video. An IT teacher, mind you, someone who teaches in technology, didn't know how to turn the volume up. When she finally figured it out, the whole class applauded and she broke down and left the room. Admittedly, this makes us students look bad, but she was an awful teacher who clearly had no clue about anything in the subject. We didn't like her, so we let her figure it out herself. My favorite science teacher in high school was slowly being forced out by administration. One day in class she stopped teaching and sat down in front of us and told us she had just been diagnosed with manuscript and began sobbing. The entire class got up and gave her a long group hug. It is one of my most cherished memories from that chapter of my life. During my freshman year, the culinary teacher went on leave while she had a baby. We made a pact to not talk at all for the whole time we were there. We had a little radio that we played music on while we worked, and we only played Country Roads. This was before it was a meme. After a few weeks of this, we all got pretty tired of it, but decided to stick it out. One day, the sub was explaining the recipe for us, and she just started begging us to say something. We all kinda just looked at each other as she started crying and none of us knew what to do. She walked out and didn't come back. We all felt super bad. I still do. Why did you all decide to do it? As a prank? Not sure. It started off as a joke, but then it became too late to turn back. One of my friends had a seizure in math class in middle school on the second day of class, and the teacher screamed and ran out of the room. Someone put a pillow under his head and someone else called the office. They found the teacher hiding in the bathroom. My friend group, 20% of the math class, requested to be transferred to a different class because we didn't feel safe with that teacher in case of a medical emergency, just to try and make her feel bad. He was showing us a diagram of a baby in the womb when it started off as an egg and the diagram was spinning around, and we kept asking if the baby spins out for 9 months and does it get dizzy etc. He headbutted a lol. As a former teacher, I say a very hearty duck you to any and all of you who shame and ridicule teachers. We don't get paid enough to deal with that on a daily basis. Never been so happy to have a retail job. Nasty customers are nicer than some of the stories here. He had them at least 2 lessons. Do Americans call them lessons? I'm not a native speaker, sorry. A week, which was, believe it or not, the amount of lessons we had with him. He was pretty mentally unstable to begin with, but it got much worse at the end of our last year in the school. Anyway, the dude would literally yell his lungs out at something as trivial as getting up from a seat too slowly or being late. And I don't mean raising his voice, I mean ducking, screaming like the world was about to end. He had a big hole at his desk, which was the result of him repeatedly slamming his fist at it throughout the years. Grade 10 science class, we were taking turns using some kind of lung capacity measuring device. Breathe into a tube and a small plastic ball gets raised by the force of your breathing. Something gets measured somehow. I can't really remember details aside from the plastic ball. Anyway, the teacher takes his turn. Apparently trying to show off with how hard he can breathe out, somehow breaks the measuring device. The teacher goes into a rage. After realizing he broke it, briefly tries to fix it, gives up, picks up a metal garbage can, and throws it in anger, storms out of the room. and doesn't come back for 10 to 15 minutes, at which point he returns and acts like nothing happened. It was more bizarre and amusing than anything else.